conversation. You gotta just kind of look at me and,
5 after.
yeah, I'm trying to set my little timer, but I forgot how to work it.
That's
I
good.
know, I know.
That always helps.
Now, who the heck are you? Seymour Clarence
Seymour Clarence Fabrick.
from Brooklyn.
Right.
I've met you before.
That's right.
I have to say, out of all my grandparents, you're the one I've heard the most stories from and about.
Possibly because they've been more stories.
I was telling some of them to Sam last night, but I forgot the word. She used the word malarkey. She's not sure they're all true. She doesn't believe they're true.
Oh.
Are they all true?
Sure.
The Dillinger story? I told her the
Oh,
Dillinger
yes.
story.
Oh, yes.
That's absolutely true.
How's that?
Oh, Grandpa. So let's see. Your mother was Fanny Crisbone, born in Scotland.
1870.
How did she... 1880.
1880, I'm sorry.
How did she end up in Scotland? How did she end up being born in
Her
Scotland?
father was a very big, I'll show you a picture of him,
Oh, you saw the picture.
from Poland.
Uh-huh.
And he was one of the few Jews that was in the Polish army as an officer. And he decided to move from Poland to Scotland. And that's where my mother was born. And my mother had 3 brothers and herself. They're all born in Scotland. And my grandfather, who I never saw, his name was Pincus Paul.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, my mother's mother, I don't remember her
I
name.
think her name was Sarah. That's what you told me
It
once.
could have been Sarah, yeah. Could have been Sarah.
Famey had 3 brothers. Do you know their names?
She had, the oldest brother was Louis. The youngest brother was Abe. The one I knew real well and I met was David. And there was one other brother that I don't remember his name.
Also, there were 4 brothers, I think.
She had 4 brothers.
Did they all end up living in Scotland, or
Yeah.
did they come here?
No, they all lived in Glasgow, Scotland.
Who is it you visit when you've gone back to Scotland?
I visited David. He was the only one left.
Mhm.
And Abe, the youngest, who was in the World War I, he was in the Scottish Brigade that went over to Belgium when Germany went through Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
He was seriously injured with the first German gas attack that affected his lungs. And he couldn't breathe good after that. And he came to America and lived with us until he died in 1950.
Wow.
So he lived with us. Even though we had 8 in the family, we had 80.
Where did Famey meet your father?
Well, my father, after he ran away from home, see, my father came from Riga.
Well, your father ran away from home. You better back up and tell me why your father ran away from home.
Well, in Russia, Latvia was a part of Russia, and they never had any use for Jews in those years. And he was in a section where they were taking Jewish boys at the age of 13 and putting them in the army in Siberia. They would go to the army, they'd have to stay 20 years in the army. So my father, who was not bar mitzvahed, he was sort of a renegade kid, he came from a family of 8, 6 sisters and 1 brother. He ran away from home, and he went to London. And there he had a 2nd or 3rd uncle or somebody who was a butcher. And my uncle took him in, he slept on the floor, and he stayed there for 3 years until he was 16. And he learned the butcher trade, meats and so on.
Was he
And
kosher?
I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway, when my father was 16, he went down to the River Thames, and he got a job as a galley helper on a ship that was going between London and Buenos Aires, South America. And he stayed on that ship as a galley helper for 2 years. And my father learned English by being in England and on a ship. And when he was 18 years old, he came back to London, and he became a bookmaker. At that time, there were no pari-mutuels, and bookmaking was a legitimate business. And they followed the horses. One time they'd run in London, another time in Wales, another time in Liverpool, and they gradually went through the British Isles. And when they got to Glasgow, Scotland, that's where he met my mother. And my mother, Amy, was 4 years older than my father. And they got married. My father was only 19, not even 20, or maybe just about 20. And they got married in Scotland. And my sister Pauline was born in Glasgow, and my sister Florence was born in Glasgow. And my grandfather, Pincus, even though he had a store, he had a grocery store, his next door neighbor was Thomas Lipton, who opened his first tea store. And the reason he had that grocery store, because that wasn't his real business. His real business was that during the summer, he had a sideshow. You know, the bearded lady, he used to go with the circus in Europe. And the strongest man, all that
Like
stuff.
Mrs. Pincus?
And he
Yeah.
went through Europe. As he went into Austria-Hungary and into Germany, into Russia, he used to smuggle out Jews with his troop and get them back into Germany, up to Hamburg, and put them on a ship where they would go to either England or Canada or America or South America, and he'd go back through Europe and do that all summer long. And then in the wintertime, he'd go back to Glasgow to the store. So when my father, when he was gone one summer, my father ran the store. My father was a very poor businessman. Anybody that was poor, he was big-hearted. He gave them stuff on credit. So the result was that the store was broke. So he was afraid of his father-in-law, who was much bigger than he was. He was 6'4". So he ran away to America, and he left my mother and my two sisters in Glasgow, and my father came to New York in 1907. And because he could speak the language, he got a job with a bunch of Jewish boys that were sort of in a semi-racket. They were selling fake furs, and they were selling fake rugs, and they went out in the countryside to the farmers, you know, in New York State and different places, and they would sell this stuff to him and then come back, you know, and he made quite a bit of money. And so he brought my mother and my two sisters over to New York. And that was about just before my sister Ruth was born. It was about 1908, 1907, 1908, about a year after he was here. So now they were living in New York, in Brooklyn, in East New York, Brownsville, the toughest part of Brooklyn where all the people was. My father was traveling all the time. He'd only come home to make a baby and go away. And my sister Ruth was born there, and May was born there, and I was born there. And in the interim, my father brought over his family, who they'd never heard from him, but he brought them over. Five of his 6 sisters he brought from Russia to the United States to live with us. And one of them, the 6th sister, the oldest one, not the oldest one, second oldest one, was married, and she did not want to leave Riga, so she never, we don't know what happened to her. She never came to the United States. The other 5 came to the United States. And one of the sisters was named Dina. My father had an uncle, Sam Shapiro, who told me he was in Milwaukee, and his family died, and he was raised with my grandmother's family, and he was in Milwaukee. So my father had a brother. He brought over his brother, his older brother, Nathan, and Nathan went to Chicago, where Nathan was married to a girl in Europe whose family were in Chicago. They were in the they were butcher business. And so he went to Chicago, and then he went to Milwaukee. So my father decided, who was traveling for a company in New York buying raw skins at that time, he went to Milwaukee, and he decided he liked Milwaukee because his brother was there, Nathan, and so they moved from New York to Milwaukee before I was born. And they were in Milwaukee, and Sam Shapiro had 3 children who were terrifically talented musicians. One of them was the leader of the Milwaukee Harmonica Orchestra, the oldest boy.
There was a harmonica orchestra.
Not
No,
harmonica.
the,
Don't you-
Philharmonic.
Oh, that's different.
The other one was played the cello,
Uh-huh.
and the third one, a girl, played the piano. So Joe Brindis, who was in Milwaukee, was a violinist, and he knew the Shapiros. And through the Shapiros, he met my father's sister, Dina. My mother didn't like Milwaukee and decided, after a short time, to go back to New York. So Dina fell in love with Joe Brindis. He fell in love with her. He was quite young. And they got married, and she stayed in Milwaukee. And we went back to New York. And the rest of the children were born in New York. My father was doing a lot of traveling for this big company in New York, buying raw skins in Canada, Michigan, Wisconsin, buying mink, muskrat, foxes, things of that thing. So he decided that Detroit, who was then getting very strong, Henry Ford was very strong after the First World War in cars, and Detroit was a booming community, booming. He decided that he would be better off to move to Detroit. So in 1920, in the fall of 20, in the winter of 20, we moved from New York. The whole family moved from New York to Detroit. My mother was pregnant with my brother Joe, and Joe was born in Detroit. And he was the only one in the family that was born in a hospital. The rest of them were born at home.
So how many kids is that? 6?
And 8.
8 kids.
Yeah, same as my father's family. They had 6 girls and 2 boys.
It is.
Matter of fact, my mother said when I was born, my father found out I was a boy. He couldn't believe it. They had to take a look for himself. So what happened was when I was a little older, I was always a big kid. When I was about 8 years old, I went with him on those trips up in Saginaw, Bay City, Canada, buying raw skinned muskrats and stuff like that. See. And then I worked in the drugstore. We lived on the east side of Detroit. Then we moved to the west side of Detroit, across from Boyski's Delicatessen, who used to be on the east side, moved to the west side. Matter of fact, Alan Mendelson from Nate and Al's Delicatessen, he worked for Boyski's when he came from Canada, when Boyski's was on Hastings Street, and we lived on Hastings Street. Then we moved to 12th Street, Boyski moved to 12th Street. That's how long I've known him. And of course, he just passed away recently. And I went to school in Detroit. I went all through school, and I got out real early because I went to summer school, and because I was a big kid, they skipped me from one grade to another grade. I don't think I was ever in a kindergarten. I think I started in the first grade. And so when my class graduated at 18, I graduated at 16. So.
And you hit the road.
No, before that.
Had you been working in the shoe business?
No, I was working in the drugstore. See, we were next door to the drugstore, and we lived over the store. So I worked in the drugstore from the time I was about 7 or 8 years old. I used to open up in the morning and mop the floor, and then finally when I was 10 years old, I worked a soda fountain, sell cigarettes. Our drugstore was the center of the action in that whole area because we had a post office in the drugstore, at the back of the drugstore. So people had to go to the post office, and we were selling a lot of booze. At that time, the Jewish doctors used to come to that drugstore, and they used to write phony prescriptions and people's names out of the phone book, for medicinal purposes. Say we get in whiskey from the government. I used to open the crates. Boy, they were packed like they came from China. And I used to deliver the whiskey to the doctors at their house when they had parties, So I was pretty well known in the neighborhood.
So they ordered it for you on phony prescriptions for medicinal purposes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we used to
Now, what about, didn't you also get alcohol from the Purple Gang?
Well, that was a different story. The Purple Gang was a bunch of Jewish boys that came also from New York, from Brownsville, where we came from.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't much older than I was, maybe 5 years older than I was. And they started to run booze for the Italians. The Italians controlled the booze, delivered the booze. So they decided to bring the booze over from Canada and down the Detroit River and sell it to the Italians. But then, because the Coast Guard started to get bigger ships, bigger boats, and they were getting tougher and tougher, the price kept going up. So the Jewish boys figured they can't make any money now, so instead of selling them the booze, they hijacked the booze. So when they hijacked the booze, the Italians got guns, and then the Jewish boys got guns, and then
We had problems.
they started to have gang wars. And what I did because they all hung around my dad's store. See, we had a first store, and the back of the store was the factory.
Mm-hmm.
And at night, nobody worked in the factory, so the Purple Gang would hang out in the back. They used to play cards there. They played cards at night in the back of the store, so I got to know them all, see. So in order to make a few bucks, they used to bootleg the whiskey by putting them in a bathtub, and put alcohol, mix it with like 10 for 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then had little colored girls, they put them in little bottles, flat half pints that you could fit here. And then they had black mesh, and they used to wrap them in black mesh, and then had gold seals on them. So they looked like they came right off the boat. They give it to us kids. We had lumberjacks with plastic bottoms, and to put about 10 inside your lumberjack. We go downtown to the hotel and wait for the salesman to come out and say, "You want to buy some whiskey? Well, is it good stuff?" Right off the boat, take it out there. You get $8 a half pint. We used to make $2 out of that. So I'd make 10, 15 bucks a night. Of course, I never got home till about 2 o'clock in the morning.
So this is way before you were working in the pharmacy.
Well,
The
no,
drugstore.
I was during the time I was working in the pharmacy, yeah. I spent most of my time in the pharmacy on the weekends.
So you're pretty much single-handedly responsible for prohibition not working, basically.
The reason it wasn't working was because everybody that had a boat would go over to Canada. It was only a short distance across the river, and they'd buy a case of whiskey for $50, and they'd bring it over and they could sell it for $100. The guy would bring over 2 cases in a rowboat,
Mm-hmm.
He'd make $100. Yes. He wasn't adverse to that.
No, I don't think so.
And thousands of people. Matter of fact, bootlegging was the second biggest business in Michigan, next to automobiles. Second biggest was bootlegging.
When did you get into the shoe business?
Well, in 1930, my boyfriends, Al and Bob Levinson, whose father was a consumptive, he was asthmatic, and we were good friends, and they decided they wanted to run away that summer to California because they had some family, their aunts and uncles lived out here.
Mm-hmm.
So they felt that it would be better for their father to live up in Sierra Madre and Tahunga, and places where it was dry. So I helped them push the car out of the garage so it wouldn't make noise, and they took off for California in 1930, and I promised that I would join them in 1931, as soon as I graduated school. And they moved in with their family up in Sierra Madre. And of course, when I wanted to come to California, my father didn't want me, 16-year-old kid, to go to California, although I had $800 saved up.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave it to my mother, gave her about $600, I had about $200. And he wanted me to go to Milwaukee because he wanted me to visit his sister, Dina. And Dina, he called up my uncle, said to give me a job in the factory. So he didn't want me to go to California. My father went broke, but the creditors wanted him to run the business, so he was going to start over again. This was in January. He was going to start over again about in March after running the business for the creditors. So when I came to Milwaukee, I stayed at my uncle and aunt's house. So my uncle was a little guy, he was only about 5'2", one of them little Napoleons. He was doing very well, making shoes for the railroad house, real cheap shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget, there was no wage and hour law, no minimum wage law, and so forth. And so people were working for 25 cents an hour, you know. And anyway, he called me, he said, I want you to come down to the office. So, you know, I was a big kid, big as I am now. And I came down to his office, and he was sitting at the desk. And he said, I'm going to give you a job in the factory, but I don't want you to tell anybody that we're related. If I find out that you tell anybody that I'm your uncle, you're fired. So I said, I thought that was a joke, because
Nice guy.
they're going to pay me $12 a week when I used to make $20 a night peddling booze, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't say anything, but I wanted to show him that, you know, and besides, he had two other nephews that were staying in the same house with him, that's from his side of the family. So I was from his wife's side of the family.
Right.
See, the three of us lived in the same room, Leo and Carl Milton and myself. And they were going to Marquette University, and then Leo couldn't make it, so he had to go to work in a factory, and he was always a problem child in the factory, never worked hard and so forth. So he put me to work in the factory with Orville Dummer, and he made him fire one of his friends to hire me. That didn't put me in very good with him.
I wouldn't think so.
But since I was a hard worker, you know, and we'd come there in the morning. Oh, by the way, I took the streetcar in the morning. He wouldn't. I used to have to be to work at 7. He came in later, and then to come home at night, he wouldn't. I couldn't get in a car with him. I had to take the streetcar from 13th Street, get off at 27th Street. He'd be waiting at 27th Street in the car, and then I would get in the car and drive home with him, so my aunt wouldn't know that you know, they didn't bring me home.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured out that at SOB that I was going to keep busy, so he couldn't come home at 6 o'clock. So you know, I used to go over and get the shoes at 6 o'clock,
Yeah.
and pack them and ship them, you know. And we didn't get home till 8 o'clock. Oh, that burned him up. He'd see me working, you know. And I did an awful lot with shoes. He was stuck with shoes, and shoes had changed, you know. In the 20s, women wore high shoes. After the World War, the high shoes died out, and all the big factories were stuck with high shoes. That's how he got in the shoe business. His brothers were from Haverhill, and he said people were buying the high shoes for a cheap price, and then cut them down into Oxfords and sell the Oxfords at a cheap price, and they had that much leather left. And they would take that leather, you know, and cut counter pockets with a hand mallet over it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how he got started in the shoe business. But he got stuck with a lot of cheap shoes, and I started to, he had a sales manager and salesman, and they weren't selling the shoes. And I said to the sales manager, can I sell some of those shoes? He said, sure. What can I get for them? He said, get whatever you can. He said, they're from 1928, 29, and 30. This was 31, 32,
Mm-hmm.
31 or 32. So we were only getting $1.25 for brand new shoes. So I says, we could get 60 cents. He'd sell them for 50 cents. He'd get rid of them. Thousands of pairs. So I used to meet all the salesmen coming in from Boston, different places. I used to say hello to them, you know, I'd see them. And one guy told me that Filene's in Boston had a table that they put out shoes for $1 day, 1 day a week, Friday. And people used to grab them off the table. They used to tie them together with a shoelace, you know, with a string, and put them on a table. So I went down to see a friend of mine, a fellow I knew was the buyer of the Boston store. That was a department store in Milwaukee. And he had the basement shoe department. So I went down and I told him about it. And I said, we'll sell you those shoes for 60 cents. You can sell them for $1. So he said, oh, he was scared, you know, and he took me to his merchandise man, and I told the merchandise man, I said, look, if they don't sell, I said, we'll take them back, because we had a whole floor full of shoes. So he said, okay, put that on a confirmation. If they don't sell, I can take them back. So I gave him 720 pair, 20 cases, or 36 pair of cases. 11 o'clock, no, at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, they had in the morning paper, they had a sale, $1 day sale at shoe department. Surprise, shoes for $1. So at 11 o'clock, he called me on the phone. He says, can we get some more shoes? He says, he says, Bob, I had to run down with the truck with another 20 cases. That's 40 cases they sold in one day. So every Friday, he would take anywhere from 50 to 75 cases. Then when they started to do good with him, then I decided I'd go somewhere else, you know. They let me go to Chicago. There was a Boston store in Chicago. They had a basement run by the Schiff Company, and Mo Goldstein was down there, and I told him, and he took 50 cases. And gradually, I got rid of all those shoes that they were stuck with for 2-3 years. So they decided to put me on the road. And that's why I had that picture taken with my car.
Right.
And I used to go out selling shoes, closeouts, regular shoes, you know, small stores all through Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Now tell me what happened to you in Crown Point, Indiana.
Well, on one of my trips, Dillinger was a big name at that time. He was captured and kept in Crown Point, Indiana. I was going from Chicago to either to South Bend or Indianapolis. I've forgotten where I was going. And I didn't pay any more attention to Dillinger than anybody else did. And they had you have to go through Crown Point. When I got there, it was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and they had him in the jailhouse was on a little sloped hill. It was a slope, and they had cops all around. I said, "What's going on in there?" And they said, "That's where Dillinger is kept. He kept in that place." See? And I went on through Crown Point, and went on to Fort Wayne or someplace in Indiana, in Indianapolis. And that night, I wound up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the papers were full of what happened at 11 o'clock that morning, 2 hours after I left. Dillinger had made that fake gun, you know, they covered it with ink or something. He whittled it out of wood. And he got out of that jail and jumped the car, and he was gone. And they were looking for him. The FBI was looking for him in all those states, Ohio and so forth and so on. Well, I paid really no attention, but I had a new Ford that I was driving, and I couldn't get the license plates because I didn't have them. I had a thing to put on, you know, to show that it was a car, but I didn't have the plates.
Mm-hmm.
So there was all kind of rumors on the radio about Dillinger was cited in Kentucky, he was cited here and all that. So I came out of Cincinnati. I was going to Columbus. I decided to go in the evening because, you know, I used to work during the day and drive at night. That's the way I do. She'll tell you that.
Okay.
And so I was driving, and I came through Columbus, Ohio. And as I came out of Columbus, I was driving about 55 miles an hour. It was just getting dark. And I noticed a big car following me. They used to be Lincoln touring cars. Lincoln was making a touring car with a dashboard. And the guy would stand on the dashboard and hold on, you know.
You mean like running board on the outside?
Running board, yeah, they
Right.
call it the dashboard, the running board. The running board, that's what it's called. And I noticed this car behind me, and I was doing about 55 miles an hour, you know, just driving. And this car was coming up on, you know, faster and faster, so I pulled over a little bit to the right to let him pass me. So when the car got alongside of me, I took a look. There was about 4 guys hanging on the running board, and they cut right in front of me, you know, and almost put me into the ditch. And here I slammed on the brakes, you know, and got the car. Guy jumped out of the car, opened the door, grabbed a hold of me, and pulled me out, you know. And another guy grabbed me, and there was a slight fellow in there, and he came out, and he asked me my name and this and that, and he says, why are you driving without license plates and so forth and so on? Didn't you know that they're looking for Dillinger, that you could have been killed, you know, if, I said, I heard something about it, but I'm trying to sell shoes. And that guy was Melvin Purvis. He was the head of the FBI. He was a slight little guy, you know. He wasn't much bigger than you were. These guys were big 250 pounders.
That's an amazing story.
And they were looking for Dillinger, but they never found him.
Really?
They didn't find him for
But he
6 months.
was killed, wasn't he, coming out of.
He was killed in Chicago, but that was very exciting for me, you know. And I went and stopped in a motel and I spent the night there. I was all shaken up with the way they pulled me over to the car.
I would think.
And, so I traveled different small towns until I started to. We had my uncle's brother had a factory in New England, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. They were making dress shoes. We were making sports shoes.
Your uncle's
And,
brother.
His brother had a company. They were making 25,000 pair of shoes a day. They had the #1 salesman in America, Herman Shaw, who was making more money than the President of the United States in the Depression. But he couldn't write, so he took me as his assistant. I had to go with him and travel with him and have to write the orders. Sit up all night long writing orders for that factory and then for this factory. He worked for both factories, see.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we got married, my uncle, the one in Milwaukee, he was jealous of his brothers, and he fired Herman Shaw and said to me, you take over the sales. You know, I was only a kid, take over the sales of 1 million pair a year. So I went to St. Louis. That's when I started to go to St. Louis and to different places, and finally to California, you know. So I came to California a few times and did a lot of business out here, made a lot of friends out here.
What made you think you could open up your own factory and be successful?
Well, when I came out here in, I think it was in 35 or 36, my friend Sid Gagnon, may he rest in peace, he took me down Alvera Street. And on Alvera Street, they showed me these Mexicans who were making those Mexican huaraches, you know, and they were sticking them together, and then the guy would have a hammer and put a sole in there and pound them with the, with the sole. Jesus. Then some guys came out here from the east and they started to open a store with making those kind of shoes and selling them to Carl, because I was selling Carl
Carl who?
Shoe Stores.
Oh.
And he had 300 stores. So every time I came back, the guy had one store, then he took the next store, then he took the next store. And they didn't have no equipment. They didn't have what we had, big heavy equipment to make shoes. So I went and I told my uncle, I'd ask him to give me $10,000. He was having a hard time. And I would come out to California and open up a factory for him. So he said, how can you open up a factory for $10,000? So I tried to explain to him what was going on down here. It was very hot then, just like it's now. And so he said, forget about it. But I didn't forget about it, because my buddies wanted me to come out here, the guys I met, and Carl wanted me to come out here, and so I decided I could make those kind of shoes. I could make shoes. And then Leo Milchin, my old buddy from Milwaukee, he was living out here, and he was working for Cobbler's, a competitor. And he was telling me how good they were doing, so I said, hell, I can do as good as that. So I came out here with no money, but with a good idea to how to make shoes. And got started with, in a couple of small places, and gradually got into a regular factory. And once I got started, I went like gangbusters. Jesus Christ, I couldn't get enough factories.
Huh.
I had 10 factories at one time.
You think you even had more than that at one time?
No, 10 factories.
Yeah. How did you start on $10,000? Sounds impossible.
I didn't have $10,000.
Oh, he never gave it to you.
I had nothing. Tom Rapinian was was an Armenian shoemaker who had a shoe repair on 9th and Main, and Sid Gagnon, who I was selling, my buddy, bought these Huarache shoes from him that he was making in the back of the store on 9th and Main. And when I was out here, I got him to move, because you can't make shoes in the back of a shoe repair store, over on 8th and Santee. They were making about like 100 pair a day. So he gave me one. I said, give me a sample. I was a hotshot salesman then.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back to St. Louis, I said to the guy, give me 20 cases, give me 50 cases. You know, before you know it, I had so many cases, the guys wanted to try. They didn't know what the hell it was. But they give me 20 cases, like, you know.
You mean you had an order for 20 cases?
Yeah, 720 pair. Well, he was only making 100 pair a day. I had them sold up for the whole year. So Tom Rapina liked me, and he wanted me to come out here. So that was in 39 and 40, and I wasn't set yet. So finally, I said I would come out here as soon as she had the baby. And he tells me, he says, if you don't come out, I close the factory. I don't want, he didn't like the help and this and that. So I had to commit myself, and I said, okay, as soon as the baby's born, I'll come out. So they were running it half-assed. There was nobody really running the factory except Tom, and he was a guy that was very excitable, you know. And so we moved out here, and the factory was there. It wasn't much of a factory, and he wanted me to be a partner with him. And he says, give me $1,000 and you be a partner, 50% partner. I said, well, I don't have any money. He said, you don't need no money. Just sign a paper. Give me a piece of paper. Put down I owe you $1,000. So I put down I owe $1,000. He said, now you're the boss. I work for you. So I gave him $25 a week. And I was selling shoes, still selling shoes for my uncle in Milwaukee. And he was giving me $50 a week draw. And I got $50 a week from the factory, because when I left Milwaukee, I was making $100 a week. That was a lot of money in 38, 39. So,
Tell them how much you made when you were married.
yeah, $16 a week. But I started selling a lot of shoes. And I had no problem selling shoes. I used to style them myself and go out and sell them. And we started, then I took Sid Gagnon as a partner, and Sid Gagnon said that his brother-in-law, he was working, his father had a jobbing house called Harry Shapiro Shoe Company. And Harry Shapiro had one son, Joe Shapiro. And Joe was in college. And so when Harry Shapiro died, they left the business to his wife and to his son. He didn't leave it to his son-in-law. So that was made him bitter. But Sidney had some arrangement with the mother-in-law, and he said that Joe Shapiro was the partner where he was working, and instead of him and I being 50-50 partners, would it be all right if I had Joe Shapiro to be a 25% partner? I had never seen Joe Shapiro, so it doesn't make a difference to me. I was a 50% partner. They weren't in the factory anyway, so so that's how Joe Shapiro became a partner. And then when the war broke out, he didn't want to go in the Army, and he wanted me to make Army shoes or something, you know, so he could get out. So I took a contract for Army leggings, and I went into the Bank of America, which we were downstairs of us on Santee Street, and who was working there was Walt Gibson. And Walt Gibson was working for the bank, and the factory was right upstairs. What is that pounding noise up there? That's an old Reese clicking machine. I need a new machine. He said, how much that cost? He said, $75. He said, I'll loan you the $75. Get rid of that machine. He thought it was coming through the ceiling.
It
So,
pays
Did you know him before?
Huh?
Did you know him? You sounded like you knew him before.
No, I never met him.
Just somebody
They had a Jewish, the Bank of America only had 2 Jews working for them in the entire Bank of America. one was him and the other was Solly Lau. And the guy that was working there, I can't think of his name right now, Gibson worked for him. He was the manager. So I went to see him and he sent me over to see Gibson. Gibson was sitting in the front. And Gibson was very interested and they wanted to contact people back east who knew me to find out my references. Well, everybody back there, including the banker in Mayville, who was my buddy, wrote such beautiful references that they accepted me with open arms. Matter of fact, Gibson gave me a $2,000 loan, and you know, there was nothing in the factory. So then Ben Salnett, who was a jobber, he was a brother-in-law to Harry Shapiro, and they were together. It's called Salnett Shapiro Jobbing House. They got into a fight, and they separated. One was Salnett Shoe Company, the other was Harry Shapiro Shoe Company. They had a fight on account of Sid Gagnon, the son-in-law. So Ben Salnett became a partner with Ted Savall, who I knew from Chicago, from Milwaukee and Chicago. And he was out here, and they opened a factory on 7th Street called Ted Savall Shoe Company, with Salnett put up the money.
Ted Savall was Little Sid Schwartz's father-in-law.
So what happened was they got into a fight and they closed the factory. But Ben Salnett was stuck on the lease. So he called me in his office when I was here, and he says, I can get you a factory. I was on Santee Street, the crappy factory. He said, I can get you a good factory over on 7th Street. We didn't have no elevator. I had to schlep everything up the stairs, second floor. So he took me over there and he showed me this factory. It had been closed for 14 months. It was dusty and dirty, but it had an elevator. And downstairs was a Greyhound bus terminal. And this was second floor. So he said, I can get you to 7,500 square feet for $100 a month. He said, I'll get you the lease. So I said, okay, I'll take it. So I moved again. We had an auction. And David Wise, this was very funny. David Wise became the world's biggest auctioneer. At that time, he worked for his father, Michael Wise. And he broke away from his father. And he was a friend of Sid Gagnon's. And the very first job that he had for an auction was my company, his Vogue Shoe Company, because I was trying to get rid of the crap that was in there, see?
Yeah.
And so he had an auction, and we cleaned out the place, and I started to make shoes in there. And before you look around, before the war broke out, I was making 600 pair of shoes a day, which was very good for that space, considering that I had no money and people were giving me credit and one thing and another, you know.
And you were still on the road selling your own shoes.
Oh yeah, I had no problem selling a shoe. Then the war broke out. And we had all kinds of problems because when the war broke out, people didn't want to ship to California because they thought the Japs were going to invade California, so they wouldn't ship. But George McPherson, who had the big wholesale house for shoe repair people, one thing or another, he was a friend of a guy in Milwaukee that recommended me to him. And when he found out my mother was from Scotland, and he's a Scotch guy, and I bumped into Ted Savall over there. So he says, Seymour, I'll give you whatever credit you want. So let me buy the stuff for you. I'll charge you 5% commission for buying it. And he said, he gave me over $10,000 worth of credit, which was a lot of money in those days. So that's how I got up to 600 pair a day right away, you know.
Grandpa, let me sidetrack you for a while and throw out some other questions for you that, who knows, your great-great-grandchildren might be interested in. When did you start playing ball?
Well, I started playing ball in Detroit, in Michigan. I was playing ball with the high school team, hardball, and I wanted to be a ball player, and I hung around on my block where I lived, on Hazelwood Avenue in Detroit. We had Harry Howman, who was with the Detroit Tigers, who won the American League batting championship 4 times, wound up with a .360 average for 20 years. We had Fred Haney, who was the third baseman who came out here and managed the Hollywood Stars And then on top of that, he managed the Milwaukee team and the Boston Braves, Fred Haney, and Johnny Bastler, who was the catcher for Detroit Tigers. So they lived on my block, and they used to take me to the ball game. You know, I'd get out of school early, and the games would start at 3 o'clock. So I was like a bat boy for the visiting teams. And then 2 doors from me lived a fellow by the name of Billy Rooks. Billy Rooks was a gambler. He had a gambling house. And Billy Rooks was a fight referee. He refereed the Dempsey-Firpo fight in Toledo in 1919 when Dempsey won the championship by knocking out Jess Willard. So he was a big sportsman. And he knew all the sports people, and he liked me. He had no children. So he took me in and introduced me to Donnie Bush, who was the manager of the Chicago White Sox, and that's how I got in with the ball team, so I could be a ball boy for the, and I used to play hardball, throw the ball up and back with them, you know. I wanted to be a ball player, but I didn't have time, you know. I had to go to work.
Yeah. But you've always played ball. When you came out here, you started.
When I came out here, I was working in a shoe factory, and Howard was little, and I wanted Howard to be a ball player because he was a left-hander, and as he got a little older, he could really whack that ball. But he never liked baseball.
Mm-hmm.
They used to kill me because he could hit a ball a mile, you know. As he got bigger, he got tall, just like I did. He was about the same size he is now when he was about 15.
He was the tallest kid in his class always.
Wow.
And he didn't like baseball.
When you started playing ball right down here at the park, was there already a team established, or did you start?
Well, I took him with me when they were playing on La Cienega, and he was only 3 years old or 3.5 years old, you know. So I had to watch him. I couldn't play with him. So I come out there every Sunday, and Howard was busy with the swings and one thing and another. And one day they were short a man, you know, and they asked me if I wanted to play. I didn't have a mitt or shoes. So I started to know all the guys, and pretty soon I got regular to play with them, see. And then I didn't play regular until about, I think about 43. Sometime around 42 or 43, I became a regular.
Is it true? I'm going to jump around on topics here for a second. Is it true that your mom was a wrestling fan? Boxing fan?
Oh,
Boxing or wrestling?
wrestling. My mother was a great sports fan. She read the Sporting News, St. Louis Sporting News, until she died. She used to read all about baseball. She went to the ball game with the Hollywood Stars when they were down on Fairfax. That's where the stadium was. But she was crazy about wrestling. And Los Angeles was the first city in America to have wrestling on television, you know, Channel 5. And that wrestling went all over the country. So she and Mrs. Yaris, that's my sister Edith's mother-in-law, she used to take her along with her, and they got front row seats. And we had an announcer by the name of Jack Lane, who was on Channel 5 for over 25 years. And the minute that they'd open up the wrestling, he used to say, and here's our good friend Mrs. Fabrick and Mrs. Yaris. They used to bring him cakes and stuff like that to eat, you know. And my mother was, she was wild about wrestling.
Where did they have these?
At the Olympic.
At the Olympic.
At
It's
the
still
Olympic.
there, right?
She took 2 streetcars and a bus to go down there, you know.
All the way till the end?
Right?
All the way until the end?
Right. She loved it to the end. Matter of fact, I went down there a couple of times to get her, you know, because, you know, no matter how they're killing one another, at 10 o'clock it was over with. It was an act, you know what I mean? The guy was killing one another, and then the guy, it's 3 minutes to 10. The other guy was getting killed would knock the other guy down, was all set up, you know, and then, so I went down there, and about 5 minutes to 10, I went over to get my mother. So some of the people thought I was a cop to arrest her or something, you know, because there used to be a lot of unsavory characters down there, see. The guy said, leave that woman alone, you know, and a couple of guys would grab me, and my mother says, leave him alone, that's my son. And I take her home, I drive her home instead of her taking the buses and streetcars.
Did your dad ever make it out here?
Oh, yeah.
He lived here too?
Yeah, my dad, I brought my mother and dad out
He was
here.
sick.
And,
Your father was sick when he came out.
I brought him out here first, before I brought the folks out here, in the 40s, early 40s. And my father was, he convinced me that he couldn't breathe, so I wanted to get him a room at the ocean because the wind would, but he said he could breathe at Hollywood Park. The horses, you know. I take him to Hollywood Park, he could breathe, you know.
Oh my goodness.
But he had a bad heart and drank a lot of whiskey. My father was a big whiskey drinker. Matter of fact, when he died, he had a bottle of whiskey in one hand, a bottle of seltzer in the other hand. It was 2 o'clock in the morning and he had a heart attack and he fell on the kitchen floor and my mother called him in over there and his hands were with the whiskey bottle. They didn't break the bottle, they were holding on.
Oh my God. Was this at the same house that Famey lived in?
Yeah, I bought that house for them.
I remember that house. I remember going and visiting her as a
Yeah.
child.
Do you really?
Yeah. My sister May lived upstairs and,
Well, not at that time, maybe, did you?
yeah, she lived upstairs.
I mean, I was only 11. I was 11. I was 10 when she died, but I remember pretty early. That was when you used to take us. You used to take us, all the grandkids, and we used to go visit Famey. Then we went to
That's
Beverly
right,
Park.
Oh, yeah, Beverly Park, we all went there every week.
The rides.
That was fun. Now, question: did you like it too, or did you just take the kids?
No, I did, I had a good
He
time.
loved
It was fun. It was
I
fun.
had a good time with the kids. I enjoyed the trip. All the trips we made, I enjoyed. We had good times. You were a tough guy when we went to New York. You were always the guy that was missing. I was counting them all. And
I'm still like that. Graham, let me ask you: when did you get involved in Freemasonry?
what?
In Freemasonry, in Scottish Rite, Shriner.
What?
When did you become a Mason and
Oh,
and
Masonic. On the Masonic order?
I'm using all the wrong words.
No, I became.
Can't hear.
I became interested because I bought a factory, Sunray Shoe Company. It had 3 partners in there, and 2 of them were Masons. And they wanted me to join the Masons. Well, you're not supposed to ask a fellow to join the Masons, see? But they kept talking about it and talking about it, and I says, okay, I like to join the Masonic order. And so they took me down to Composite Lodge, and that was in, as a matter of fact, I was raised a 3rd-degree Mason in 1943. It's more than 50 years ago. And they wanted me to become like a worshipful master, see? And because they had a couple of guys in there they didn't like. And I said, no, I didn't want to do that. You have to go through the chairs. It takes 7 years. And I didn't have the time to do that because I was traveling a lot. You know, you have to be there all the time. So I couldn't go through the chairs to become the worshipful master. But then I went from there to the Scottish Rite, became a 32nd degree Mason. And your dad's a Mason, you know. He went through Masonry. And then I went to the Shrine, and I've been a Shriner for, geez, I don't know how long.
A long time.
50 years.
Possibly.
More, about 50
Certainly
years.
as long as I've known you, and plus many.
Yeah. Had a lot of fun in the Shrine. The Shrine was a lot of fun.
Is it going to last? Is it going to make it into the next generation?
I don't think so. They're losing, they're not getting,
Getting in there.
young people today. 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, there was an awful lot of clubs. The Optimist Club and the Elks Club and all kind of Rotarians and, you know, all kind of clubs. And the Odd Fellows, there was a million different clubs.
I think
But,
the Oddfellows is very big today.
Yeah.
So what happened is that what's happening in the younger generation now, the people are not interested in these clubs. The Masons are having a hard time to keep going and to go on into masonry, you know, very hard. And like less and less people are going to church. And as a matter of fact, the only growth of all religion has been the Jewish reform. The Jewish religion has gotten stronger in the last 50 years, much stronger than it was 50 years ago. But the churches have gone down quite a bit. A lot of young people are not interested in church anymore.
Hey, I got another question for you. How did you end up on Nixon's enemy list?
How they end up on what?
On Nixon's enemy list.
Well, what happened was,
I mean, I know you didn't make the A list, but you were on the B list, right?
I was on the list. What happened there was, I was active with the Shoe Manufacturers Association in Washington, and they were working through the trade association, through the ambassador of trade, and I kept telling them that's the wrong place to go, because all we were doing was having meetings, and meetings didn't produce anything. I said, we have to work with the White House. That's where the power is, you know. And no, they said you got to work through lawyers, and you got to do this, and you got to have meetings and all that. And I wasted a couple of years doing that. And one time I said, I'm going to try it myself. I decided to go to the White House myself. And I walked up there, and ice cold, you know, and naturally they wouldn't let me in. Who do you know? And they wouldn't. So I was staying at the Madison Hotel, and right across the street was the Washington Post newspaper.
Do you know when this was? What year this was?
Hmm?
Do you know what year this was?
Yeah, I'll tell you what year it was. 1972, and that was the year of Watergate, and it was in the spring of that year, and I went across the street to the Washington Post, and the guy that was running the Washington Post was a fellow by the name of Ben Bradley. Ben Bradley was the editor. So I went in to see him, and first I called up for an appointment. They said you can't get an appointment. Then I walked across the street, and I told her I want to see Ben Bradley. They said, who are you? Anyway, I kept persisting on that, and finally he said, all right, send them in. So I came in there as a guy smoking a cigar, and feet up on a desk, and a nice guy, and what do you want to see me about? So I told him about my problems with the White House and the shoe business, and he said, you're not going to get anywhere with this White House because the Republicans don't want to change trade, and you know, that's been a policy and so forth. I told him, I said, the imports at that time in '72 were starting to hurt us, because we under the Marshall Plan, we built up Europe, and Europe was shipping a lot of shoes. It didn't take the Italians long to get in the business, because they had 5 generations of shoemakers, you know, and they make them by hand. They were only getting $3 a day after the war, so it was cheaper than what we were paying. So I said to him, well, I'd like to call attention to the president. I think the president ought to know about this, so we can't get to the president. We have to go to those other guys, and they just give us a lot of bullshit, see. So he said, well, you can't get to the president. I said, well, I want to run an ad to the president. So he says, well, if you want to run an ad, we'll run an ad for you. So I said, he takes me in a room and gives me some paper, and I start writing out an ad. I wrote out a big full-page ad. How much is that? $8,800. I had plenty of money then, so it didn't make a difference. I wrote out an ad, and then at the bottom I put down, I says, we think of you as the president of all the people. We don't consider you King Richard I, you know. So I brought that in to show it to him. He said, I wouldn't put that in the ad. He said, you better take that out. He said, I'll print the ad. He read the ad. He thought it was good. He made a few changes, you know, about the fact that we couldn't compete and we can't get to see him. And
Ben Bradley personally helped edit this.
yeah, Ben Bradley. He's the head of the Washington Post.
Yeah.
I think he's still the head of the Washington
So
Post.
you have
I
an
think he is.
voice.
I actually think I met
So-
him once.
As a matter of fact, I got a book about the Washington Post. And so the next day, Congress was their last day in session before they retired for the summer, or whatever it was. And Nixon was running for re-election. And he was nervous, you know, he was always a nervous guy about he was gonna get re-elected anyway, running against McGovern, you know. But anyway, I ran that ad in the morning paper. And boy, that shook him up something. That came out, a full-page ad. We got the ad here somewhere. And
Everything's in the file.
and the reason I heard about the story, you know, what happened is that I wanted to run the ad on a Thursday, and I was supposed to go to Toronto, and I had my brother come up from Los Angeles to meet me in Chicago, and I was going to take him to Toronto. And that morning was when they ran the ad, and I had my brother who came up on a night flight. My brother had a heart attack at the airport in Chicago. So all I could do was to take him to a hospital in Chicago. And what happened was the president of, when Nixon saw that ad, he got burned up. Seymour Fabrick, it sounded like a phony name. Yeah. So he got a hold of Flanagan. Flanagan was his assistant in the White House. He got a hold of Flanagan, and he wanted to know if that's a phony name, Fabric, or who is that, and find out and get all that information. So Flanagan was meeting that morning with the president of Tom McGann. Can't think of his name, the Irishman, you know.
No, I can't.
A friend of mine, the one that followed me as getting that award. And anyway, this guy said, who is that? The guy said, I know Seymour Fabrick. He's a shoe manufacturer in California, legitimate, see? So they told that to Nixon. Mm-hmm. And then they got a hold of, because I said in my note, I was going to run that ad. I had a note that I sent along with him to what's the name? I was going to run that same ad in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, which I didn't have the money to do it. That was very expensive. Right. Washington was $8,800. New York Times about $12,000. I don't know what the Wall Street Journal was. So this guy Flanagan tells the Irishman who called up Lowengaard, who he knew from New York, and said to Lowengaard, get a hold of Seymour, who called Los Angeles trying to find me. They couldn't find me because I was taking my brother to the hospital. Right. Not to run the ad in the left word. Don't run the ad in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times because the president is all upset, you know, about that ad. Well, I couldn't run the ad anyway. I didn't have the money. I just threatened to run the ad. So the upshot was I didn't know what happened until I got to Toronto. And I called up Tess and somebody else came up to Chicago. I had my brother in a Catholic hospital right near the airport in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, he only had a mild heart attack. And I was in Toronto when that thing happened. But then Nixon was very upset at me, and when he started to get even with me, he had a fellow from the Internal Revenue come into the factory, and he stayed there for almost 11 months.
Oh my God!
You know, every week he was in there, checking on payments to the social, payments on the workers' compensation, all that stuff.
Did he ever meet with you? He never met with you, though.
Do I have what?
Nixon never met with you.
No, Nixon?
Yeah.
Nixon never met with anybody. He planned Watergate right after that.
That was the end of Nixon.
Yeah, that was before Congress adjourned, and that Watergate happened just about the same time.
Grandpa, let me ask you. You told Sylvia and Leo some stories about your aunts and uncles. Someone got shot. What's the story? What's this?
My father had very bad luck with his 5 sisters that came to visit us in New York. Dina was the only one that got married of the 5. I shouldn't say that. One of the 5 was married, Edith. The oldest sister came with her husband. and he was a jeweler. But the other four sisters, Dina was the one that got married to Joe in Milwaukee. And then Sarah, who was the youngest, the second youngest, she fell in love with a boy in New York, and somehow or other it didn't work out, and she's a refugee or something happened, and she committed suicide by jumping off the building that we were living in Brooklyn.
Wow.
And she killed herself. And so we had
Scary.
Bessie and Lily. And when we moved to Detroit, Bessie and Lily went with us. And Bessie was beautiful. Well, Dina was good looking, and Bessie was better. And Bessie was in love with a boy that was in the Army. And he went overseas, and he got shot up bad. And they brought him back to Michigan and put him in the Army hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And he was a vegetable. And she used to go there by bus to go to see him every weekend. And the next door neighbor to us in Detroit was a Gentile fella, a very nice guy. His name was George Davis, and his uncle was the biggest coal and coke dealer in Michigan. Davis Coal and Coke. He had all them, all those wagons with the horses all over town.
Those were the days when being a coke dealer was legal.
If you say,
Yeah.
today it's a little different.
Coal and Coke.
Right.
And then they delivered ice in the summertime, So he came in the house one Saturday night in front of all of us. We were all there, all of us. And right in the bedroom, and he took out a gun and he said, "If I can't have you," he says, "nobody can have you." And he shot her right in front of all of us.
Oh,
And he went over and picked up the phone, called the police, and the police came and arrested him. And he pleaded guilty, and he was given life in prison. And Michigan did not have a capital punishment. Life imprisonment in Michigan was you are eligible for parole in 7 years. So 7 years later, 1928, he got out of prison. He went to Chicago, and he's a pharmacist. And he opened up a drugstore on the south side of Chicago. As a matter of fact, remember I told you I looked him up. I went there to see him.
Huh.
And I bought sometime in the 30s, I don't remember just when it was. I was over to Spiegel's on 35th Street. So he was on 51st Street. And Davis was the name of the drugstore. I went in to see him, he didn't know me.
Sure.
I just wanted to see what it looked like.
Mhm.
A handsome looking guy,
Huh.
And he had this drugstore on the south side of Chicago in the 30s.
You never talked to
No. He got
Interesting.
out of prison in 28, and this was about 35.
Oh.
36, for 35 or 36. And so I only had one of my father's sisters left, and that was Lily. And she never got married, and she passed away, and Edith, husband died. Edith was the oldest one, and Edith came to California, and she was friendly with my sister Ruth. And she lived, she hung around with my mother. My mother was never thrilled with her anyway, but she used to go with my mother, and she finally passed away. My sister Ruth took care of the burial.
Now all your sisters got married.
All my sisters, Florence didn't get married.
Yes, she did.
Yeah, Florence married, yeah. She got married. She didn't have any children, and she was married to one guy. And Florence suffered a stroke, and she died. She was 10 months in the stroke.
That's horrible.
So we settled down in California, and I became a big shoe manufacturer, and made a lot of money, and spent a lot of money, and did a lot of dumb things.
Well, do you have any words for do you want to get philosophical for for whoever might be watching this?
Well, I tell you, I think that first of all, I like to see my grandchildren and their children be very helpful and good for the family, to help one another, and also to help out people who need help, and be helpful in charities and do things of that type. I think that's good for them, and they shouldn't be selfish. They should be very helpful to one another.
Thank you, Grandpa.